Okay, got the camera on, as Romain Shannon reminded me, and the digital recorder, as Irving a lot of times reminds me. The mic is on, and the Facebook is on, and the Kalaloshin is on. So we're ready. We are sponsored by Shalom Fogel in our travels through Bava Basra, Ilui Nishmas, Yaakov Zeb ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka bas Yaakov Yosef, Sivya Miriam bas God, Yosef ben Sion ben Yaakov Zev, by Baruch Ian, Ilui Nishmas Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther bas Gittel, Avram ben Shmuel HaKayin, by Yaakov Yemansky, with Akaris HaTov to the Rav and the Zum family, and Nachas from children and grandchildren, by A.B. Spry from Nachas from children and grandchildren, by Ed Salah from London, Joshua Rosenberg, a virtual Talmud. We welcome in Saba, and we welcome in Aaron Swade, who we wish a refuah shalem, and Mo Kushner. Great to have you, Irving Fishbaum, Stephen Holtzman, Mark Frankel, Marshall Castle, Dr. Black, Baruch Ian, Yitzi Fuchs, Rabbi Kranz, Michal Akta, Nachman Chapler, Menachem Yemansky, Ruben Pollack, Shelley Zeitlin. We welcome in Shalom Fogel, Arnold Schenkman, Ilya Shutman, Yitzi Moller, Avram Rezepkowitz, and David Helfgott on Kalaloshin. Here in the shul, back in place, Rich Lenner. You see, as soon as he can, he makes sure to come back. Chaim Kramer, Gedalia Engel, who's looking chipper, Michal Avram, and Ruvain Shannon. It's great to have everybody with us. Oh, Berish, and Berish. It is great to have you here, Berish. You switched from over there. You're playing musical chairs. So we're opening up in the middle of a sugya. We know that if 3 trees are in a row, then the Chachamim hold you get the karka in between the trees, underneath the trees, so that if they die, you could replant them. And according to the halachic opinion, the area outside of the trees for the picker and his basket. The question is, what's the range for the trees to be apart from one another and still considered to be a unit? They can't be too close to each other, because if they're too close to each other, then they're not planted there permanently, but rather to be uprooted and repotted somewhere else. They can't be too far, because then they're considered independent trees and not a field of trees. They're not connected enough. So we had one opinion, if it's the ranges from 4 to 8, and we had another opinion, 4 to 8 amas, and another opinion from 8 to 16 amas. So the Gemara said a proof from a Mishnah. However, now Rabbi Yosef retorts to Abaya, and we're holding on the bottom line of Daf Pei Beza Amid Beis. Amalei Anolo Yadan. I don't know proof from that Mishnah. El Uvda Hava, there was an incident, Bedura de Ravosa. It's interesting that many times when I said this, mistakenly, I pronounced it Bedura de Rusa. However, that's not the correct pronunciation, because Rashbam says it's an Ir Shel Roim. It was a city of shepherds. So it's Bedura de Ravosa. It's the city of shepherds. V'asa lekame de Rabbi Yehuda, and they came before Rabbi Yehuda. V'amalei, and it was a situation where the trees were spaced less than 8 amas apart from one another. V'amalei ziv havlei, give him kimalo bakar v'kelav. Give him the area of in between the trees of enough for the cattle and its equipment. The le'ava yadana, and we didn't know kimlo bakar v'kelav kamahava. How much is the area of the cattle and its equipment? However, Kavan de Shaminullah de Tanan, Lo Yit Adam Elon Samach Listei Chaverai, a person shouldn't plant a tree next to his friend's field, Elem Kain Hirchuk Mimena Dalad Amas, unless he distances himself 4 amas. B'tani Allah Dalad Amas Sha'amru, the 4 amas that is stated is Kedei Avodas HaKeren. It's enough for working the vineyard. And working a vineyard means enough for him to go with the team of cattle in that area. Shmami no kimeloi baka v'kelav daled amas. So that means that even if the land between the trees is just 4 amas, it's considered already not too close to one another, and it's a tree of fields. So that's like the opinion of 4 to 8, and not 8 to 16. Now Taisa says it really isn't mukhrach that it's like the opinion of 4 to 8. It's just like the opinion that even if it's 4 amas apart, that's not too close. It could be it's 4 to 16, but since we only had the 2 opinions of 4 to 8, and 8 to 16, this would be a proof like the opinion of 4 to 8. Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef Miloi Tanan, and like the opinion of Rav Yosef, it doesn't say. In other words, when we said before that the Mishnah in Klayim, that it says that if the vines are apart 16 amas one from another, you could plant in between. So we learned out from there that unless it's 16 amas apart, it's still considered one vineyard. And it doesn't say like Rav Yosef, the share of 8. It says Rav Meir Rav Shimon Oimrim, Hanoiteya as karma shmoina amas al shmoina amas. If you plant a vineyard 8 by 8 amas, where the furrows with vines are apart 8 amas, mutar lahavi zera l'sham. You could put seed there. So that means that already if they're distanced 8 amas, they're not joined together. They're not considered one vineyard. So that would be a raya like Rabbi Yosef, that's 4 to 8 and not 8 to 16. So he said, well, if we're only bringing a raya from the Mishnayos in Kloyim, we like the previous raya because there, if you remember, we gave a Maisa Shahaya, where in Salmain they had an incident where they planted 16 amas apart, and they allowed them to bring stuff in between. So the Gemara says, Bishloim Rabbi Yosef. It's good according to Rabbi Yosef, who says the shear is 4 to 18. So Bishloim Rabbi Yosef, Aliba to Rabbi Shimon. It's good, Rabbi Yosef, according to Rabbi Shimon. Shaminon le mefuzarin. We have a case where they're apart, and we say that they shouldn't be apart more than 8 amas. B'shaminon le ritzufin, that they shouldn't be closer than 4 amas. Mufuzarin hada amran, when they're apart, like we said, we quoted a Mishnah from Kloyim, right? That Anoiteas Karma Shmoina Amas al Shmoina Amas Mutar Lahavi Zera L'Sham. So that's it shouldn't be further than 8 amas, because if it's further than 8 amas, it's disjointed and it's not one field. Ritzufim, it shouldn't be closer than 4 amas. Titnan kerem on the 2 al pochas medal amas, a vineyard that's planted where the vines are less than 4 amas apart, ain't kerem. It's not considered a vineyard. Now, a minimum vineyard is 2 opposite 2 and 1 coming out as a tail. If they're closer than 4 amas, that's not a vineyard, because that's not the regular way of planting. Divrei Reb Shimon. The Chachamim and the Chachamim say it is a vineyard. They're let's say planted 2 amas apart, it is a vineyard. And we pull out the middle ones and make them as if they're not there. But it does have a din of a vineyard. But anyway, we have an opinion that if it's less than 4 amas, it's not considered to be a vineyard. So we see it, if it's less than 4 amas apart, we consider it as if it's going to be repotted somewhere else, and then it can't be considered a field of trees. El Rav Nachman Ali b'Rabbanan, but according to Rav Nachman, according to Rabbanan, that the shear is from 8 to 16, Mefuzarin Shaminalei. That we had yesterday, that if you plant vines 16 amas apart, you're allowed to plant in the middle other seed, because it's not considered, the whole thing is not considered a vineyard, because they're 2 apart from one another. So there we see the share of 16 amas. But Ritzufan Mishaminalei, where do we see that if it's less than 8 amas, it's too close? That we have no basis for. So he says, well, it's svarahu. It's logic. Midil Rab Shimon palga, since Rab Shimon, the shear of too close is the half of the shear of too far, because too far is more than 8 amas, so too close is less than 4 amas. Rabbanan Nami palga, since he says too far is 16 amas, so too close is less than 8 amas. Now comes the halacha, which is different than both opinions. I made a bracha already. I'm a Rava. The halacha is hilchasa ma'arba amas, that when could we say that it is a tree field? It's from 4 amas, because anything more than 4 amas is not too close together. Va'ad sheish esrei, until 16 amas. Tanya kavasi Rava, we have a brayso like Rava. Kama yehu mekuravin, how close could it be and still be considered a field of trees? Arba amas. V'kama yehu meruchakim, and how distant can it be? Sheish esrei. So if you have within 4 to 16, so if Mark sells to Marshall 3 trees that are spaced within 4 to 16, one from the other, harizek kona karka, Marshall gets the karka beneath it, and ve'soilona shebenehem, and all the trees that grow, small trees that grow in between them. Lefikach, therefore, yavei sha'ilan, if the tree dries out, or nixas, or it gets cut down, yesh karka, he has the real estate, and he could replant it. Pachas mekan, less than 4, or yeser alkan, or more than 16. Or shalokon bezeh akazel, he bought them one after another, so he didn't buy 3 together. Harizel loikana loyas akarka, Marshall doesn't get the real estate, v'loyas ilana shebeneim, nor the trees in between them. Lefikach yavei sho'ilan, if the tree dries up, or nixas, or gets cut down, ein loikarka, he cannot plant again. By Reb Yirmiyah, now this is a very technical question. You could understand if you're doing business with Marshall, he's going to get very technical, right? By Reb Yirmiyah, kishu moeded, when he measures, mamakam kotzar hu moeded, does he measure from the ground where the tree is very narrow, or mamakam rachav hu moeded, or does he measure when it, the other way around, kishu moeded mamakam kotzar hu moeded, does he measure from where it's narrow, or does he measure from where it's wide? Now, of course, if you measure from where it's wide, then you might have less room than 4 amas, and then Mark will say Marshall doesn't get anything. If you measure from where it's narrow, then it'll be more than 4 amas, and then he would get. So Amalei Rav Gevia Mibei Kosel or Rav Ashi. So the Gemara brings a raya that it's neither. It's very interesting. Tajma, Titnan Haruchuva Shebegefen. If, let's say, you grafted a young branch onto the main tree, and so now the question is, if you measure the distance, where do you measure from? Do you measure from the fresh graft, or do you measure from the actual tree? So harechuva shebegefen eino moedeid ela meikar hasheni. You don't measure from the beginning of the new graft, nor do you measure from the trunk of the old tree, but rather you measure from somewhere in the middle. Rather, you measure from the somewhere in the middle. Eina moeded ela meikar hasheni. You only measure from the second knot, so to speak. So you don't measure from the outside of the graft, and you don't measure from the trunk itself. Rather, you measure from somewhere in the middle. And here too, we would use a middle point, not from the bottom where it's very wide, and not from the top where it's very narrow, but somewhere in the middle. It's not giving us really a good idea. You see, Ikar Hasheni, the Rashbam just says Pikak Hasheni, the second knot. It's not clear what that means by a graft. Let me just see if the Rabbeinu Gershom says anything more specific. The Rabbeinu Gershom seems not to learn like the Rashbam at all. The Rabbeinu Gershom seems to learn that the Gemara is being poshit, that you do it from the outside of the graft, and then here also it would be poshit that you do it from the bottom of the tree. But that's not the way the Rashbam learns. Wow, that's interesting. Now, by Rabbi Yirmiyah, now here, Mark is a wise guy. He sells 3 shoots of a tree. This is a huge tree, and it has from underground roots, there grew out from the same tree 3, the main tree, and 2 saplings. But to all appearances, it's 3 trees. And they're separate by 4 amas. But they're all coming from underground from the same tree. From the roots. So Amalei Rav Gevia Mebei Kasel Rav Ashi, Tojma, Ditnan HaMavrich Gimel Gafonim. Now, Mavrich is from the Lashon of a berech, a knee. This means you have a vine and you bend it into the ground. It's a choice vine, so you bend it into the ground that it should take root. And the derech is that after a while, when it takes root, you cut it. So it separates from the mother. Now here you took from a vine and you bent it twice. Hamavrich Gimel Gafonim. You went ahead and you bent 3 vines into the ground, and they took root already in the ground. V'ikreim nirin. But you didn't cut it from the mother vine. Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok Aimer, im yesh beineim medalad amas vad shmoina. If they have a distance between them from 4 amas to 8, mitzdarfen, they could combine to make it the shear of a vineyard, even though they weren't cut from the mother. V'im lav, if not, if there isn't a distance of 4 to 8, hey mitzdarfen, they can't combine to give it a shear of a vineyard. So here you see that even though you didn't cut it from the mother vine, but they took root and they look like separate vines and they're distanced properly from 4 to 8, you could consider them as a vineyard. So here too, where Mark sells the 3 branches that come out of the ground, even though they're part of the mother tree, if they're distanced 4 to 8 amas, then that would be considered like 3 trees, and Marshall would get the field around it, in between it, and if they die, he would be able to replant it. Here Mark sells Marshall 2 trees in Mark's field, and 1 on the elevated border. Now we already had this discussion if the elevated border is considered like a separate entity or part of the field. So the question is, since he sold 2 and 1 on the elevated border, Mark, of course, says that's not a tree field. That's not a field of trees because they're in 2 separate places. Marshall says, look, you sold me 2 trees. They're all 3 on your property. It is a field of trees. Or what about Shnayim b'sei shaloi ve'echad b'sei shel chaveiroi? He has 2 trees, Mark sells 2 trees on his property. Bordering him is Dr. Block. He has a tree in Dr. Block's field, which he owns the area around that tree. And he sells that to Marshall too. Can Marshall say, you sold me a field of trees? Or Mark says, like, you can't combine. 2 is in my property, 1 is Dr. Block's property. My.
Do they have to be 16 amas?
Yes, of course. So take Tishbi Ataretz Kushis Ribois. We're not sure about these 2 shilas. Boy Ravashi, another shilah. Bor Mahu Shetafsik. He sells Marshall 3 trees. They have the right distance from 4 to 16, but there's a pit in between 2 of the trees. And of course, Mark says you can't combine them because there's a pit in between. Amasamayim Mahu Shetafsik. If a pit doesn't interpose, what about if there's a Amasamayim, a water canal in between 2 of the trees? Rishis Arabim, what if there's a public path in between 2 of the trees? I mean, Mark is, like, you can't combine it. Richba de Diklamau. I mean, Mark was missing yesterday. He came up with all of these questions. Richba de Diklamau. What if there's a hedge of palm trees in between the 2 trees, 2 of the 3 trees? Take them. We need Eliyahu for this. When Mark comes up with questions, They're humdingers. Boy minei Hillel merebi. Ola erez beinei amau.
Who was this Hillel?
Huh?
Who was this Hillel?
I don't know. Why?
It wasn't the Hillel that we Hillel Hazak.
Well, there's more than one Hillel. We know that. Yeah. I don't know who he is.
It says in there,
What?
for 8, it says here, he's one of 6 generations.
So Rabbeinu Gershom says he was a 6th generation descendant of the original Hillel. Thank you, Rabbeinu Gershom. So boy minei Hillel merebi. Hillel asked Rebbe, Ola erez beineihem mahu. What happens? Mark sells 3 trees, and it grows a cedar between the 3 trees. What's the din? So, Allah Bereshusa says the Gemara, if Allah Bereshusa Didei, if Allah Bereshusa, if it grew after he sold it to Marshall, so then, since Marshall owns the real estate in between the trees, Bereshusa Didei Nafa, it grew it in Marshall's property. So what's the shayla? Of course, he owns the cedar tree. He owns the cedar tree now. I mean, stop nitpicking, Mark. I mean, that's ridiculous. You sold them the 3 trees. They have only a distance of 8 to 16 amas, 4 to 16 amas, according to halacha, between them. And now there grows a cedar, that belongs to Marshall. I mean, even though it's Marshall, you got to be fair. Says the Gemara, Ella, the question is, Hayu erez beineihem ma'u. What about when he sold it, there was a cedar tree in between the 2 trees? And Mark, who was nitpicking the whole night tonight, Mark says, look, you can't combine it because there's a cedar in between, like the bar and like the Amos Amayim, it should interpose. Amalei, so Rebbe answered him, Kana, he gets the trees with the field, and Vikana, he gets the cedar tree too. So Marshall gets the whole kit and caboodle. Now, we've been assuming that the 3 trees are in one line. And as long as there is no more than 16 amas between each tree, and no less than 4 amas in between each tree, so then Marshall gets the area underneath the tree, in between them, and around them, Kimalai Ara V'Salai, the picker and his basket. That's the way we've been assuming, but that's not universal. As the Gemara says, Keitzad Heimondan, what's the formation of these 3 trees? Rava Mekashura. Rava says that they're all in a line. Shmula Mekachatzuva, they're in a triangle. Now, if you know what the old time, I don't know the new one what it looks like, but the old time Norelco shaver had 3 heads in the shape of a triangle. And Shmuel says that that's how the trees were set up, like a triangle. Now, Mandama Kashura, the one that says it, Ravu says that even if they're in a line, Kol Shechein Kachatzuva. Surely when they're in a triangular formation. But a Mandama Kachatzuva, Shmuel, who says it's only when they're in a triangular formation, you see the reason why Mark is okay with selling him the land in between is because since it's a triangular formation, it's not easy to plow in between them. But if it would be straight, it would be easy to plow, that he doesn't cede to Marshall. And that's what the Gemara says. Mandam and Kishur, if Rav says even if they're in a straight line, surely when they're triangular. Mandam and Kechatzuva, and one that says triangular, but not if it's a straight line. Because then it's easy to plant in between them, and Mark is not ceding that to Marshall. Mark doesn't give anything if he could use it. Now, Mask Rav Amnuna, I just want you to think about playing hooky next time. Now, Mask Rav Amnuna, Mask Rav Amnuna, Ulamanda Amar Kechatsuva, Shmuel says if it's triangular only, my time at the loy mizdar bein tayu, because Mark can't use it conveniently. So then the Gemara says, what about if Mark sells to Marshall, according to Shmuel that says only if it's in a triangle, what if he sells to him 3 huge thorn bushes that are in a line? Now, thorn bushes are not easy to plant in between because the team of oxen get scratched by the thorn bushes. So maybe there Shmuel would agree that Mark gives him the area in between, even if it's in a straight line. So the Gemara says, let's see it inside. My time it's not easy to plant in between. If he sells him 3 Roman thorn bushes, even if they're in a straight line, one next to the other, Marshall wants the thorn bushes because he's going to make a big fence of thorns, or he's going to use it as darts because of so many people that are picking on him. If he sells them 3 Roman thorn bushes, where you can't easily plant in between them, will Shmuel agree? Says the Gemara, no. Remember, what's the reason when you sell 3 trees, you get the area underneath and in between because it's a field of trees. There's no such thing as a field of thorn bushes. Thorn bushes are not significant, and that can't be considered a field of thorn bushes. Trees are significant, and then, according to Rav, even if they're in a straight line, according to Shmuel, only if in their triangular formation is it considered significant that you should get the land in between, underneath, and around it.
Yeah, I figure Mark would sell me thorn bushes.
Figure you would buy them. Now, this one always puts his foot in his mouth.
No, that wasn't my foot, that was the thorn.
Says the Mishnah. So here, Mark is very versatile. So Amaycha Reish Behem Agasa. If Mark sells the head of large livestock, the business norm is he doesn't sell with the head the legs. If he sells the legs, he doesn't sell the head with it. If he sells the lungs, he doesn't sell the liver with them. If he sells the liver, he doesn't sell the lungs with it. But that's true only by large livestock. By small livestock, like sheep, like goats, if he sells the head, he sells the feet with it. If he sells the feet, however, he doesn't sell it with it, the head. If he sells the lungs, he sells with it the liver. But even by small livestock, if he sells the liver, he doesn't sell with it the lungs. There are 4 laws in sale. Now, of course, there's more than 4 laws, but in this specific area where there is a discrepancy between the seller and the buyer, you could understand dealing with Mark and Marshall, that that's a pretty normal occurrence, right? So, machaloi chitin yafis. If Mark says he was selling quality wheat to Marshall, v'nimtzu rois, and Marshall finds it to be inferior, so halekeach yochel lazer, Marshall could back out because it's a mekach tais. If he wants to take it, however, Mark can back out. On the other hand, if it's the other way around, Royce, he sells him inferior wheat, v'nimtzu yafis, and it turns out to be superior, moicher yachal arzabay, the seller could reverse it, because, he thought he was selling him inferior stuff. Rois v'nimtzu rois, yafis v'nimtzu yafis, if he was selling inferior and it was inferior, or superior and it was superior, and Marshall made a kinyan, then ein echad mehem yachal arzabay. Neither of them could retract. However, in a case where it's completely different schayra, Shramsis, he was selling red wheat, v'nimtzu levana, and it turns out to be pale white wheat, or levana, pale wheat, v'nimtzu shramsis, and it turned out to be red wheat. Eitzim shel zayis, he was selling him olive wood, v'nimtzu shel shikma, and it turns out to be sycamore, or shel shikma, v'nimtzu shel zayis, sycamore, and it turns out to be olive. So it's a completely different commodity than was agreed upon. So here, either of them could back out. Yayin v'nimtzu chaymitz, wine, and it turns out to be vinegar, or chaymitz v'nimtzu yayin, vinegar, and it turns out to be wine. So it's a completely different commodity. Shneim yechalim la'arzabay. They both could back out and reverse the sale. Okay, we're going to stop here now. Rabbi say, and we have a big simcha tonight because we're going to be finishing Masechtas Bava Kama and starting Bava Metzia. So this is a good time for those people that run off when we finish the daf to say, you know what? Why should I run off when if I stay a few minutes longer, usually not more than 6 minutes, I could finish Masechtas.